Lena was always acutely aware of her responsibilities as a mother, a wife, and a professional. Her days seemed never-ending, offering her no moments of respite. But tonight, something was different. An unsettling tension hung in the air, gnawing at her sense of peace. She arrived home late, her body weighed down by the exhaustion of the day, and pushed open the door. The house greeted her with an eerie silence, starkly contrasting the usual chaos of her evenings. Her housekeeper, a woman she had always trusted, stood waiting, her face pale, her hands nervously twisting together. "Lena, there's something you need to know," Raina began, her voice low and trembling as if the words she was about to utter could shatter the fragile calm of the room. Lena dropped her bag on the floor, her brow furrowing as she slipped off her shoes. This simple act, which usually brought her a sense of relief, failed to ease her tonight. "What is it? What happened?" she asked, though deep inside, she feared the answer. Raina hesitated, glancing over her shoulder to ensure no one else was within earshot. Her voice barely audible, she explained, "I was downstairs preparing lunch. I heard noises coming from Mila's room. I went upstairs, and when I opened the door—" She paused, her voice quaking as she continued. "Mila, he wasn't wearing anything. Lena and Liam's, he was there too. He ran out the moment I opened the door." Lena stared at Raina, her mind struggling to process what she had just heard. It felt as though the ground beneath her had shifted, leaving her unsteady. "Are you sure, Raina? Are you absolutely certain?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. Raina stiffened, her eyes flashing with frustration. "Of course I'm sure. You know I wouldn't make something like this up." Lena's heart pounded in her chest, the warmth of her home replaced by a suffocating dread. Raina had always been reliable, but the image she painted, her son and her niece involved in something so inappropriate, was too much to bear. She stood there for a long moment, just looking at Raina, trying to make sense of it all. Liams and Mila were only 12 years old. They were cousins, incredibly close, yes, but could something like this really happen? No, it wasn't possible. They were still just children. And if it were true, how could she ever explain this to Mila's mother, her own sister, who had remarried and moved abroad after her husband passed away? Lena had been entrusted with Mila's care since the girl was small. Questions swirled relentlessly in Lena's mind. She walked into the living room and saw the two children sitting on the couch, huddled together. Their faces lit up when they saw her. "Mommy!" Mila shouted, leaping off the couch to hug her. Liams quickly followed, wrapping his arms around her. For a brief moment she felt the comforting warmth of their affection, a small flicker of hope that almost made her forget what Raina had just told her. Lena gently pushed them away, her voice steady but firm. "We need to talk. Aunt Raina told me something, and I need to know the truth." Both children looked up at her, their wide eyes brimming with innocence. "What did she say?" Liams asked, his voice small but curious. "She said something happened in Mila's room today. She said you were both there and—" Lena paused, taking a deep breath. "She said you weren't wearing any clothes." The room fell silent. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. After a long moment, Liam shook his head, his expression resolute. "That's not true, Mom. We didn't do anything," he said, his voice firm. Mila, standing beside her cousin, nodded in agreement. "Aunt Raina is lying," she said with conviction. Lena's gaze moved from one child to the other. There was no hesitation in their voices, no flicker of guilt in their eyes. They spoke with such certainty that, for a moment, Lena felt her resolve waver. Could Rena have misunderstood? Are you sure? Lena's voice sharpened, tinged with desperation. You know I won't tolerate lies. Yes, Mom, we're telling the truth, Liam said, his voice unwavering. Mila echoed him, her small hands clenched into fists at her sides. Lena stood there, looking at them both, feeling the conviction in their words. But what about Raina? She wasn't the kind of person to fabricate something like this. She had no reason to lie. Lena's mind reeled with doubt and confusion, the weight of Raina's claims and the children's denial pressing heavily on her. Something didn't add up, and she was determined to uncover the truth. That night, Lena lay awake in bed, her mind racing with chaotic thoughts. She hadn't told her husband Damien about what had happened. What would he say? How would he react? Unease gnawed at her, a persistent feeling that something was deeply wrong in her home. She could feel it in the air, in the innocent, wide-eyed gazes of Liam's and Mila. Whatever it was, she was determined to uncover the truth. In the days that followed, life continued as though nothing had happened. Strangely, Raina, the housekeeper, never brought up the incident again. Perhaps Raina had misinterpreted the situation. Lena tried to reassure herself. Mila and Liam's had always been close, practically inseparable since they were young. Their bond, their constant presence in each other's lives, had never seemed unusual. Lena fought to push aside the lingering unease that crept into her thoughts each night since the unsettling evening. She wanted desperately to believe in the innocence of her children and in the care and love Raina had always shown them. But life has a way of taking unexpected turns. That afternoon, while tidying up Liam's room, Lena's sense of unease bubbled back to the surface. As she dusted his desk and picked up scattered toys, her eyes wandered to his dresser. Something inside her pulled her toward it. She hesitated, her stomach tightening with anxiety. Slowly, she opened the drawer and began organizing the clothes inside. That's when she saw it. A small piece of fabric, not just any piece of fabric, it was a pair of Mila's underwear, folded neatly among Liam's shirts. The air seemed to grow heavier as Lena stared at it, her breath catching in her throat. Her mind raced, piecing together fragments of vague conversations and half-formed thoughts that had haunted her for days. How did this end up here? Liam's! Her voice was sharp and urgent, echoing through the house. Liam's! She called again, louder this time, her voice trembling with panic. The house remained eerily quiet, swallowing her words and amplifying the dread that filled her chest. Moments later, Liam's appeared at the door, his face filled with concern. "What's wrong, Mom?" he asked nervously, his voice wavering. Lena held up the underwear, her hand trembling slightly. "What is this about?" she demanded, disbelief dripping from her tone. Liam's eyes widened, confusion spreading across his face. I don't know, Mom. I swear I don't know how it got there." Lena's gaze bore into her son, her grip tightening on the fabric. "You expect me to believe that?" she asked, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and fear. "This is Mila's. How did it end up in your drawer?" "I don't know," Liam cried, his voice breaking. Maybe Aunt Raina put it there by accident when she was folding the laundry. I didn't do anything, I swear." Lena's heart pounded as she studied her son's face, searching for any flicker of deceit, but his eyes were filled with fear, his body trembling slightly under her scrutinizing gaze. Without another word, Lena let out a heavy, shaky breath and placed the underwear back in the drawer. "Go," she said quietly, barely looking at Liam's as he hurried out of the room. Lena collapsed onto Liam's bed, her mind spinning with unanswered questions. God," she whispered, staring up at the ceiling. "What is happening to my children?" The afternoon slipped into the evening, and as the shadows outside lengthened, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible loomed over her family. The silence in the house felt oppressive, thick and stifling, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to break. That evening, when Damien returned from work, Lena was still haunted by the day's events. As soon as he stepped through the door, she told him everything about the underwear, about Liam's reaction, and about the growing suspicions gnawing at her. Damien listened in silence, his brow furrowed with worry as she spoke. When she finally finished, he shook his head, anger flaring in his voice. "This is ridiculous," he burst out, his frustration boiling over. "They're just kids, Lena. You're overthinking this." Lena shook her head, her voice softening into a whisper of despair. "I want to believe that, but none of this makes sense. Something isn't right, Damien." Damien let out a heavy sigh, his patience wearing thin. "They said they didn't do anything, right? Maybe Raina made a mistake. Maybe you're letting your imagination get the best of you." But even as he said it, Lena caught a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Damien didn't have the answers either. Neither of them did, and the silence between them only deepened the growing chasm in their relationship. That night felt like it stretched into eternity. Lena couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, as her thoughts spiraled out of control. Fragments of memories, glances, and words replayed in her mind, refusing to let her rest. Something was wrong in the house, she was sure of it. Damien's silence, Liam's unwavering denial, Mila's innocent gaze, they all seemed like masks, hiding a truth she couldn't yet uncover. One night, as Lena lay beside Damien in bed, staring up at the ceiling in the darkness, an idea struck her like lightning. Hidden cameras. If something was happening, if her children were hiding something, she would catch it on tape. It was the only way to uncover the truth. The next day, Lena discreetly installed cameras throughout the house. She kept her plan a secret, not telling her children, her husband, or even Raina. She needed to see for herself what was really going on. That entire day at work, her mind was heavy with the weight of her suspicions. An unshakable urge gnawed at her, pushing her to leave her desk and drive home. No one knew she was coming. When Lena opened the front door, she stepped inside cautiously, moving slowly and deliberately to avoid making any noise. The silence in the house was oppressive, thick enough to choke on. She paused, listening for any sound, but the house was eerily quiet. Slipping off her shoes, she made her way upstairs, her steps soft and deliberate. That's when she heard it. A faint rustling sound coming from behind a closed door. Her heart pounded as she moved closer to the bedroom. She stopped, took a deep breath, and gently pushed the door open. Standing before her was Damien, her husband, stepping out of the room. His shirt was only half-buttoned, and his hair was disheveled. He froze when he saw her, his eyes widening in shock. "Lena," he stammered, his voice shaky. What are you doing home?" Lena stared at Damien, her eyes scanning his rumpled clothes and the loose belt hanging from his pants. The half-buttoned shirt looked like it had been thrown on in a hurry. It didn't take long for her to realize something was very wrong. "What are you doing here, Damien?" Lena asked, her voice sharp, slicing through the heavy tension hanging in the air. Damien fidgeted, running a hand through his hair, his discomfort evident in every movement. I came home early too, wanted to check on the kids, With Raina not here today, I thought they might be getting into trouble," he said, his voice wavering. Lena's mind churned. The kids? His explanation sounded rehearsed, too convenient, but before she could question him further, Damien stepped past her and grabbed her hand. "Come on," he said, his tone light but strained. "Let's check on them together. Maybe they're just up to some mischief." They stopped outside Liam's door first. Damien knocked lightly before turning the knob and pushing the door open. The room was silent, the curtains drawn. Liam's was lying on his bed, deeply engrossed in a video game. "Hey, buddy," Damien said, stepping inside with a forced smile. "What are you up to?" Liam's barely glanced up, shrugging. "Just playing," he muttered, his focus glued to the screen. Lena stood in the doorway, observing the scene. Her mind raced, trying to piece together the reasons behind Damien's urgency and his disheveled appearance. Why was he so intent on checking on the children? Why did he seem so flustered? Before she could delve deeper into her thoughts, Damien turned back to her, wearing the same forced smile. "Looks like Liam's is behaving," he said. "Let's check on Mila now." Without waiting for Lena's response, he ushered her out of the room and down the hall to Mila's. The door was slightly ajar, and Damien gently pushed it open. Mila was curled up on her bed, absorbed in a book, completely oblivious to the tension radiating from her parents. Lena looked at her niece, her heart tightening. Everything seemed perfectly normal, too normal. But deep down, Lena felt an unease, as if something sinister was lurking just beneath the surface. "Hi, sweetheart," Lena said, her voice softening. Mila looked up and smiled faintly. "Hi, Mom, I'm just reading." Damien leaned against the door frame, chuckling lightly. "Well, it seems like everyone's on their best behavior today," he said, glancing back at Lena. "Maybe I was worried for nothing. Let's head back downstairs. No need to stress about the kids tonight." Lena tried to keep her composure, but inside, a storm was brewing. That night, after Damien had gone to bed, Lena sat at her computer and carefully reviewed the footage from the hidden cameras. At first, it was all mundane, ordinary, uneventful moments that seemed to confirm nothing was amiss. But then the screen flickered, and the images began to sharpen. Lena stopped breathing. The footage grew clearer, each frame stabbing at her chest like a dagger. She stared at the screen, her body frozen, her mind reeling. Tears streamed down her face as she watched. She sat motionless, unable to look away, as the horrifying scenes unfolded before her eyes. Lena fixed her eyes on the screen as each frame came into sharper focus. The video showed Damien, her husband, entering the living room, his hair disheveled, his shirt hastily buttoned. Behind him followed Raina, the housekeeper, exchanging furtive glances with him as if fearful of being caught. They stood close, their bodies inching nearer until they finally touched in a way that made Lena's chest tighten painfully. Each breath felt heavier than the last. But what sent a chilling shiver down Lena's spine was the other angle captured on the screen. A hallway camera caught Liam's and Mila, standing outside, peeking through the slightly ajar door. Their wide, curious eyes betrayed their innocence, completely unaware of the gravity of what they were witnessing. Lena stopped breathing. Her eyes stayed glued to the screen as the video continued, showing something that shattered her heart into pieces. Liam's and Mila, unable to grasp the implications of what they'd seen, mimicked it. They removed their clothes, laid down, and tried to reenact what they had observed. Mila even replicated the sounds she had overheard from Raina. Lena shot out of her chair, her entire body trembling as tears streamed down her face. She couldn't believe her eyes. Her mind spun in a vortex of fury, anguish, and disbelief. The next morning, Lena waited for Damien and Raina in the living room. She sat at the computer, the damning video queued up and ready to play. When Damien entered, he froze at the sight of Lena. What's going on, honey?" he asked, trying to mask his unease. "Sit down," Lena commanded, her voice icy. Damien hesitated, but eventually complied. Moments later, Raina arrived, her face immediately clouded with confusion when she saw Lena's steely demeanor. "Mrs. Lena, is something wrong?" Raina stammered, wringing her hands nervously. "Be quiet," Lena said, her eyes sharp as daggers. With a click of her mouth, the video began to play. Damien and Raina sat in stunned silence as the damning footage unfolded on the screen. The room grew suffocatingly quiet, the weight of the revelation pressing down on all of them. Damien swallowed hard, opening his mouth to speak, but Lena raised a hand to stop him. "Do you think I'm a fool?" Lena hissed, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You've both destroyed this family. And in front of the kids, how dare you?" Raina crumpled to the floor, tears streaming down her face. "Mrs. Lena, I'm sorry. I don't even know how to explain. I didn't mean—" "Shut up!" Lena screamed, her eyes blazing with fury. "Didn't mean to? After everything I just saw, you have the nerve to say that?" Damien stood, attempting to place a hand on Lena's shoulder. "Honey, I know I messed up, but we can fix this, can't we? Don't let this ruin our family." "Fix this?" Lena scoffed, her eyes ablaze with rage. "You didn't just betray me. You destroyed the innocence of our children, and you think I can forgive you?" Without hesitation, Lena raised her hand and slapped Damien hard across the face. The sound echoed through the room as Damien staggered, clutching his cheek. "Both of you, get out of my house," Lena demanded, her voice ice cold. "Now!" Raina wept, begging for forgiveness, but Lena's heart was unyielding. "There's nothing more to say. Pack your things and leave." Damien bowed his head and pulled Raina to her feet. Neither spoke another word as they quietly exited the house. The slam of the door behind them felt like the closing chapter of a painful book. Lena collapsed onto the couch, overwhelmed by a mixture of relief and sorrow. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning of a new journey. In the days that followed, Lena channeled all her energy into caring for Liams and Mila. She sat them down to explain the gravity of what had happened, ensuring they understood right from wrong. "I know all of this is confusing," Lena said gently, "but I want you to understand something very important. Just because someone is older doesn't mean they're always right. You're good kids, and I trust you to do the right thing moving forward." Liams and Mila nodded quietly, their eyes reflecting a blend of hurt innocence and newfound determination. Lena initiated divorce proceedings against Damien, resolute in her decision to end the relationship and protect her family. Despite Damien's attempts to reconcile, Lena stood firm. Raina, too, disappeared from their lives entirely. Over time, Lena, Liams, and Mila rebuilt their lives. They found joy in the small things, family dinners, trips to the park, and exciting little vacations. Lena also rediscovered herself. She joined an art club, rekindled her love for painting, and explored new culinary skills, savoring her newfound freedom and happiness. For the first time in years, Lena felt empowered, strong, and alive, ready to embrace a future untethered by betrayal. And that's the end of the story. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If the story resonates with you, help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. It's a big milestone that will motivate us to keep creating more useful content for you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.